Me to be here today. My name is Deutsch, and I'm for the last 10 months I've been the executive director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. Before that, I was with New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. So I've been around Albany for about 24 years now, doing advocacy work on everything from taxes to budgets to low-income programs to education. Many of you have probably seen me around the state in your areas doing kind of in-depth analysis of the budget and what's being proposed and what we like and what we don't like. And usually you hear more about what I don't like than what I like. Unfortunately, that's the nature of budgets. But I want to talk a little bit today about income inequality in New York, which is definitely a big problem. But then also some of the things that moving forward we can do to address that. And some, new, big, exciting things are on the horizon, right? I mean, we're talking about a statewide $15 minimum wage the governor just announced to push for, right? So, yeah, we can clap for that. It's a good thing. So, anytime we're talking about raising the wages of people at the bottom and lifting that bottom, that's a really positive step, I think. Will we get to 15? I sure hope so. How long will it take is another question. What barriers there are to getting there. All of that remains to be seen, and it's going to be a big fight. So we're all going to be in that together, this fight for 15. So we're going to have to focus on that a lot this year. But it seems like we have a champion in our governor, and he's willing to push that. So that's exciting, because I'm not always, talking about the things he does in a favorable light. And I may, take him to task on some issues today. So sorry, Juanita. I'm sure it's nothing new for them. They're well aware of my position on things. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that, we hear a lot about that the recession's over, right? And the Great Depression, the Great Recession that we had back in 2008, come and gone, everybody's doing great again. I mean, do people feel that way? No. Yeah, I'm not feeling that way either. Yeah, so it seems that, the recession is over for some people. And what we've seen is that literally 100% of all the income gains since the recession have gone to the top 1% in New York State. And when I say 100%, I mean 100%. Actually, the bottom 99 has taken a step backwards since 2008. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And when you start talking about raising wages for people, that's a way to address that. So we're excited about that. But, to listen to folks talk about the fact that the recession is over, I think is just a little bit ridiculous. We have a situation in New York right now where the top 1% in New York State get 33% of all the income generated in New York. In New York City, the top 1% get 45% of all the income. So that's wages, business income, dividends, capital gains, all of that. So those at the top are definitely getting the lion's share. And when you live in a society where so few have so much and so many have so little, that's not good for our economy, right? That's definitely not good for our economy, even though you hear a lot of people say, well, hey, I never got a job from a poor person. But the reality is, government can play a role too. And when we had our lowest income inequality in the state and the nation is when government did play a big role in helping people. So think about the fact that, we had our lowest income inequality in New York and in the nation between, kind of after World War II, say 1950 to about 1979. And why did that happen? What were some of the things that were going on there? Government invested in people, right? We had the GI Bill. We helped people buy homes, start businesses, get a college education. That saw the greatest expansion of the middle class in this country. You know what else we had growing at that time? We had unions growing and growing. The union movement was growing. It was protecting workers. It was fighting for workers' rights. It was fighting to get workers the pay that they deserve, right? And now, moving forward from there, when everybody was kind of growing and prospering at the same rate, then back in 1980, things started to change a little. And it was kind of the advent of trickle-down economics and supply-side economics. And if we cut taxes for the people at the top, we're going to create jobs for people at the bottom. And what did we see? You know, that didn't quite work out, and we saw massive inflation. We saw interest rates on your home mortgages at 14 to 17%. You know, so that type of approach really didn't work out too well. It's when we were investing in people, that's when things worked better. That's when we started to address income inequality. So we need to start thinking about the past, right? You know, a lot of my friends, you know, who know I work in and around the union movement will come up to me and say, hey, come on, you know, I mean, the unions are dying, right? We don't need unions anymore, right? We're okay now, we're protected. And I was like, you know, when you think about that, you know, you should be going out there and thanking union members because you take for granted some of the things that they got for you. You know, when you're out there having a 5-day work week, you know, you like that 5-day work week, go thank a union. You know, when you have a 40-hour work week or an 8-hour day, go thank a union. When you have a minimum wage, you know, when you have weekends off, when you have worker protections, those are all things that unions fought for. And I tell my friends, you think we don't need a union anymore, you just look at Walmart. You look at McDonald's and the fast food industry. You look at the abysmal wages that are being paid to people. And we're not only are they paying abysmal wages, but then we're subsidizing them through our tax dollars to do that, right? We spent some $7 billion just subsidizing fast food workers because their wages are so low they qualify for Medicaid, they qualify for food stamps, they qualify for other forms of public assistance. You shouldn't be getting those things if you're working, right? You should be making enough when you're working. So raising the floor obviously is a big step in that. But we also back then invested in not only our human infrastructure, we invested in our physical infrastructure too, right? We really invested in roads and bridges, creating the interstate highway systems, developing public transit options for people. These were things that paid off in spades and really helped grow the economy and grew jobs. So those are the type of things that we need to be doing. But, you know, from 1980 on, you know, it used to be, prior to that, the wealthy paid about 50% as an effective tax rate, right? The marginal tax rates were higher, but people were paying about 50%, the wealthiest. Now, you know, the wealthiest, because they make their money off of money rather than through work, they get taxed at a much lower rate, right? At a capital gains rate of 15%. So the wealthiest among us are paying an effective rate of some 15%, while the rest of us are paying like somewhere between 30 and 35%, let's say, to the federal government. Does that seem fair to you? It certainly doesn't seem fair to me, and that's something that we need to address. You know, so again, I tell my friends, you know, when the top 25 hedge fund managers in the United States make as much as every kindergarten teacher combined in the United States, that's why we need unions. You know, we need somebody to push back against them, because that's not right either. So we need to make sure we're investing in our local economies. We need to make sure we're investing in our state economy if we're going to grow it and move forward. So it's not about, you know, cutting taxes for the wealthy. It's not about cutting spending to local governments. It's not about union busting or union bashing. It's about growing the economy and investing in people, investing in infrastructure. That's what grows an economy. You know, we're spending $8 billion a year or so on economic development in the name of job creation. You know, some of that pays off, some of it doesn't pay off. We've looked at, you know, in that $8 billion, there's, you know, 25, 30 programs that we're spending money on. Some are more effective than others, right? But the reality is we need a real litmus test to make sure that we're spending this money properly. You know, companies promise to create jobs, then don't create those jobs. Do we ask for that money back? No. They keep that money. And they continue to either cut jobs or not create the number of jobs that they say through things like, you know, industrial development agencies, the IDAs at the local level, Empire State Development is spending a lot of money in the name of job creation. You know, if we're going to do that, let's make sure it's incredibly transparent and incredibly accountable, and that we're getting a good bang for our buck, or else we're being bad stewards of the public dollars here, public tax dollars. I have no problem using public dollars for job creation, even if it's in the private sector, but it needs to be done in the right way and be done wisely to make sure we're getting a good bang for our buck. So instead, we've been moving in the opposite direction, right? So the governor and the legislature have imposed what I would call kind of austerity spending in New York, right? We set a 2% state spending cap. You know, that's not the 2% local property tax cap. That's a completely different thing. But you put those two things together, and it's really hurting local communities. They're not able to raise the money that they need to provide the services at the local level. You've seen, you know, you all know, you've seen, we've seen about 80,000 public sector workers laid off since the recession, right? Teachers, you know, people who are cleaning the streets, people who are providing services at the local level through our cities, towns, and villages. We've seen a lot of cuts, and the private sector job growth, certainly in central New York and the southern tier, hasn't kept pace with the fact that there's been a lot of public sector job loss as well. So the economies in central New York and the southern tier aren't growing the way, for instance, the economy in New York City is growing. New York City has a very robust, vibrant economy that bounced back a lot quicker than the upstate economy is bouncing back. So that's something that, you know, we have to keep in mind. So that 2% state spending cap, you know, while it sounds good, we want to hold the line on spending, inevitably what happens is education gets 4% or 5%, Medicaid will see a 4 or 5% bump, and then that means the rest of the programs and services out there are going to kind of see either flat funding or we're going to see funding go down. So that's a problem. You know, that's something that we need to address. We can't continue to disinvest, especially in things like human services, social services programs, which are always the ones that get hit the hardest on the chopping block when it comes to state budgets. And, you know, we just saw the American Community Survey information came out. You know, the city of Syracuse has seen a jump in child poverty. It went from, I think, 46% to a little over 50%. When you think about that, 50% of the kids in the city of Syracuse live in poverty. That's shameful. That's something that, you know, we shouldn't stand for. If 50% of the kids had a cold, we'd be calling it an epidemic, right? And we'd all be rallying together to do something about it. But when 50% of the kids live in poverty, it's just like, oh, you know, okay, that's a shame. But, you know, we need to focus on that. That's something we need to do something about. It's something we can do something about. But we need to change the way we operate. We've also seen some major cuts to our cities, towns, and villages, right? So when we talk about the need to reduce property taxes, part of the problem is we're not giving our cities, towns, and villages the resources they need to provide the services that residents expect. So you've got the 2% state spending cap, you've got the 2% property tax cap, you know, you combine those two, and then you add on top of that basically a 75% reduction since 1980 in AIM funding, the money that goes to help cities, towns, and villages. You know, I'll give you an example, and this is not in inflation-adjusted dollars, which, you know, I often talk about, trying not to throw too many numbers out there, but in 1980, we funded AIM at $815 million, okay? In 2014, we funded it at $715 million. That's not adjusting for inflation. If we adjusted for inflation, we'd need to be spending about $2.5 billion on AIM every year in order to be where we were back in 1980. So, you know, when we scratch our heads wondering why property taxes go up, wondering why we can't deliver services at the local level, why cities, towns, and villages, counties are getting squeezed, you know, the state spending cap, the local property tax cap, the lack of AIM funding, the pullback of education funding in some areas, those are all factors that contribute to that and something that we need to address, right? So we had some money, we had $5 billion in bank settlement money. I wanted to see a lot of that go into infrastructure improvements. We have crumbling infrastructure all across the state. Our roads, our bridges, are terribly deficient and need work, yet we're not putting the money into that. So, I was dismayed that, the governor put forward this kind of what we call the Hunger Games competition for upstate New York, right? Where you have, 3 pools of $500 million that 7 regional economic development councils have to compete for. Yeah, I don't like that competition approach to economic development, but I would suggest that all the regions, all those 7 regions, have very real needs that they need to meet, and we could spread that out. And we could spread out some of the other money that went for different things that, weren't on my top hit parade list, but obviously, I'm not making the rules here. I'm just kind of the armchair quarterback sometimes who's saying should or shouldn't do that. But the reality is, I don't think we're spending our money terribly effectively when it comes to our infrastructure or economic development programs, right? I mean, I don't want to see economic development programs where we're using state public dollars to help a local business or help a private business, and then they go out of state to hire a construction company to build their plant or something to that effect, right? We want to make sure that we get the project labor agreements. We want to make sure that prevailing wage is included. If we're going to use the public dollars for job creation, we should make sure that the people who are, creating those plants or working at those businesses are getting paid a decent wage and have worker safety and worker standards that are up to snuff. So those are the type of things we need to continue to fight for, whether it's in the realm of economic development or within the budget itself. Those are things that we all need to focus on. So I think there's a lot we can do and we can do together. So primarily right now, we've got the Fight for 15 coming up, and that is going to be huge, right? We're going to have the governor release his budget in January. We don't really know what's going to be in that. It's always kind of a guessing game. The governor kind of spells it out in his State of the State address, but last year was one of those kind of weird years where, unfortunately the governor's father, former Governor Mario Cuomo, passed away, and he wound up, since he had to be at the funeral, rightfully so, and mourn his father's loss, he combined his State of the State and his budget address. Which, for people like me, that kind of threw us for a loop, right? We're like waiting to see what's going to be in the budget from the State of the State address, but now it was all combined together, so it was kind of a mad scramble to try and, analyze the budget and what was in it. And it was a mixed bag, right? Some good, some bad. So this year, we're looking forward to the fact that he's going to be pushing a $15 minimum wage, but recently at the Business Council, he told them, look, I'm also going to be pushing big tax breaks for business, which we've pushed, I think, for the last 3 years pretty hard on, and he got a lot of tax breaks for businesses. I'm not sure which ones are left to cut. I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. But that's a problem that I think, we need to focus on. It's a lot of these things, the governor kind of links issues together oftentimes. He tries to link, education funding with the passage of things like the Education Investment Tax Credit that would provide massive tax breaks to wealthy people that are giving money to private or parochial schools. So, hey, I'll give you $1 billion for education, but you have to pass this piece of legislation in order to get it. So there's a lot of linkages. So I'm worried that, he's going to say, I want a $15 minimum wage, but I also want to eliminate the corporate tax in New York State, That sets up a very dangerous dynamic and a kind of a divide and conquer strategy. So that's something I want everybody to be aware of right now, because that's going to be one of the big things moving into next year that I think we're going to have to deal with. What are the trade-offs to get that $15 an hour minimum wage enacted? The Senate is going to want a lot of business tax cuts, and they're going to want to winnow that $15 down to something far less than $15, right? The governor proposed $10.50 in upstate and $11.50 in New York City last year when he was talking about the minimum wage. So going up to 15 bucks is a big jump from there. And there's going to be a lot of opposition to that. Certainly the Business Council, National Federation of Independent Businesses, you know, my buddy E.J. McMahon and the Empire Center, all the kind of usual suspects that are going to fight against the $15 minimum wage. You know, so it's going to be up to us to make sure we have a loud voice on behalf of all low-wage workers, because remember that $15 an hour is not just going to help people who are making the minimum wage now, it's going to help a lot of folks. And I think, you know, a lot of us have said too, you know, there's a lot of state and local public sector employees that aren't making $15 an hour either. There's, you know, thousands and thousands of nonprofit sector workers who are working under state and local contracts that aren't getting paid $15 an hour. You know, what about them? Are we going to be lifting them up too? I mean, obviously we can't talk about a $15 minimum wage if the state's own employees and local government employees aren't getting that either. So there's going to have to be adjustments there, and that's going to come in the form of adjusting contracts with local governments, with nonprofits, to boost the level of those contracts to make sure that they can pay $15 an hour. So that's another consideration that's part of this battle that we're going to have to be cognizant of as well. So, you know, also we're going to have to look at things like, you know, making sure we get paid family leave, we can reform unemployment insurance. There's a lot of things we can do to help and protect workers. We can develop career pathways to help people move up the socioeconomic ladder and not just be stuck in one position, but give people room for growth, whether it's at the state level, the nonprofit level, or in the private sector. We can make sure that there's room for people to move up the ladder. So doing things like expanding child care subsidies so low-income families can go to work, expanding transportation subsidies and transportation options, fully funding universal pre-K. These are all things we have to do as well in order to move the economy forward. So it's really going to be all of us working together, right? I mean, it's about all of us, not just one of us, or, you know, I've got this contract negotiation coming up, or I've got this particular contract battle. We need to all be working together for the betterment of everybody, and that's what I think this Fight for 15 is going to do for us, and it really gives us a platform to talk about income inequality and talk about why we need to boost wages for people at the bottom. So I'm hoping, and I'm hoping like hell, that we're all going to work together to make sure that that happens. So I'll end it there. I know it's a Saturday morning, and you've all got other things to do, and there's a party brewing outside. I couldn't make it here because I had to get turned around because they're shutting down streets out there, but looks like it's going to be a fun day in Syracuse. So I hope you all have a great time, and I'm going to look forward to working with all of you in the future as we move forward. So thank you.